The phone rang at 6:14 in the morning, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I didn't. By the time I hung up, I understood something I hadn't let myself admit the night before. Walking away doesn't end a war. Sometimes it's just the first shot. My mother had looked me in the eye on Mother's Day and told me she wished I'd never been born to her. I hadn't argued. I'd simply turned and left. What I didn't know yet was that my leaving would unravel everything she thought she knew about her own family, starting with her favorite son. I drove 3 hours to get to my mother's house that morning, and I remember thinking the whole way that this year would be different. I'd just come off a brutal stretch of training at Fort Campbell, the kind that eats your weekends and your holidays and doesn't apologize for it. And I'd requested this particular leave months in advance because Mother's Day mattered to me. It always had, even when it hadn't mattered to her. I stopped at a florist outside Clarksville and bought her favorite white peonies, the ones she used to grow along the back fence before my father died, and the garden went to seed along with everything else. I'd also spent weeks putting together something more personal than flowers, something I'd tucked into a small wrapped box on the passenger seat, and I kept glancing at it at red lights like it might disappear if I didn't check. The house looked the same as it always did. White shutters, the porch swing my father built still creaking on its chains, my mother's minivan parked crooked in the driveway the way she always parked it. But there was a second car there too, gleaming and unfamiliar, backed into the spot closest to the door like it belonged there more than I did. That was Ryan's new truck. My younger brother met me at the door before I even reached it, practically vibrating with the news. Mom had co-signed a loan for him, just to help him get back on his feet. He said though he'd been back on his feet for years, and this was by my count the third vehicle she'd helped him into since he turned 25. I hugged him anyway. I hugged Emily, his wife, who gave me a tired smile that I filed away without examining too closely. I found my mother in the kitchen apron on humming along to the radio, like nothing in the world was wrong, and for a moment I let myself believe nothing was. Dinner started well enough. My Aunt Carol was there, and a couple of cousins. And the table was loud in the comfortable way big family tables get when nobody's paying close attention to who's talking and who isn't. But somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the pot roast, the conversation folded itself entirely around Ryan, the truck, his promotion at the dealership, the vacation he and Emily were planning. My mother's face lit up every time his name came up. It didn't do that for me. It hadn't done that for me in longer than I wanted to count. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd learned a long time ago how to sit through these dinners without needing anything from them. How to let the attention flow around me, like water around a rock. 12 years in the army teaches you that kind of stillness if nothing else. But stillness has a cost, and I felt it building behind my ribs as the meal went on. As my mother refilled Ryan's glass without being asked and let mine sit empty. Then Ryan, riding high on the day's admiration, turned to me with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Grace only knows the army," he said loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Family's never really been her priority, has it?" A few people laughed, not cruelly, just the easy laughter of people who don't understand what they've just done. I didn't laugh. I didn't say anything at all. I'd spent a career learning not to react to things designed to provoke a reaction, and I used every bit of that training right then, because something in me understood, even before I could name it, that this dinner was building towards something worse. When the plates were cleared, I brought out the box I'd carried in from the car. Inside was something I'd spent weeks putting together. I didn't tell her what not yet. I just set it in front of her and watched her face hoping. My mother looked at it for a long moment, then she pushed it aside, barely glancing at it, the way you'd push aside a piece of mail you didn't feel like opening. She looked at me, really looked at me in a way she hadn't all evening, and said the words I don't think I'll ever fully stop hearing. "I wish you'd never been my daughter." The table went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a lull in conversation, but the kind that has weight to it that presses against your ears. I saw Emily's fork stop halfway to her mouth. I saw Carol's eyes go wide. I saw Ryan for just a second look almost satisfied. I stood up slowly. I looked at my mother for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only 3 or 4 seconds long enough to see that she meant it, or at least that some tired, resentful part of her did. Then I said it, the only thing that came to me. Then live as if you never had one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I walked to the door, got in my SUV, and drove away from that house without looking back at it once in the rearview mirror. That night, alone in a hotel room 40 minutes from the base, I made a decision that would end up changing everything for all of us. Though I couldn't have known that yet, lying there in the dark staring at a ceiling that wasn't mine, wondering how 32 years had led me to this exact, quiet, devastating moment. The hotel room had that particular kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, without turning on the television, without checking my phone, just running my mother's words through my mind on a loop, testing them from different angles like I was searching for an exit that wasn't there. I wish you'd never been my daughter. There wasn't an angle that made it hurt less. Somewhere around midnight, something in me shifted. Not sadness. Exactly. I'd already done my grieving for the version of my mother. I kept hoping to find underneath the one who actually existed. What I felt instead was clarity, cold and practical. The same kind that used to settle over me before a difficult op. If my mother wanted to live as though I'd never been her daughter, I was going to let her find out exactly what that meant. Because here was the truth. Nobody at that table understood the truth I'd never once used as leverage or announced as a favor. For 6 years, I had been quietly keeping my mother's entire financial life afloat. It started small, the way these things always do. Her health insurance premium had lapsed 1 month when I was home on leave back, when my father's life insurance was running thin, and she was too proud to ask anyone for help. I'd covered it without telling her, called the company myself, put it on auto-pay from my own account. Then it was the property taxes on the house the following spring, when I found the notice unopened on her kitchen counter and didn't have the heart to bring it up with her directly. Then homeowner's insurance. Then after the derecho tore through the county 3 years back and took half her roof with it. A repair loan I'd taken out in my own name because her credit couldn't carry it, and I didn't want her to feel the shame of that conversation. I never told her. That was deliberate. I didn't want gratitude, and I definitely didn't want it dangled over Ryan's head as evidence of favoritism, because I already knew how that would play in our family. It would somehow become proof that I was trying to buy my way into being loved, rather than what it actually was, which was just taking care of my mother, the way I thought a daughter should. Ryan, meanwhile, let her believe he was the one holding things together. He never corrected her. Every time she thanked the family for helping her get by, I watched him accept the credit with a small, easy nod, and I never once said otherwise, because correcting him would have meant explaining myself. And I've never been good at asking for credit. I didn't think I should need. That night in the hotel room, I stopped being willing to carry a secret that was costing me everything, and giving him everything. I opened my laptop around 1 line in the morning, and logged into my bank's website. My hands were steady, they're trained to be steady, even though something underneath my sternum was not. I found the recurring transfer to Linda Collins' homeowner's insurance and canceled it. I found the automatic payment to the county tax office and canceled that too. I pulled up the repair loan, still in my name, still 2 years from being paid off, and I didn't cancel that one. I couldn't legally. It was my debt. But I stopped the auxiliary payment I'd been quietly adding each month to knock it down faster than required. I let it revert to the minimum. In the morning, I called the insurance company, directly identified myself, and asked that all future correspondence and billing be redirected to the property owner of record, my mother, rather than to me as the authorized payer. The representative on the line asked almost gently if I was sure, since I'd been the primary contact on the account for years. I told her yes, I was sure. Then I called my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Hall, who'd helped me set up my will before my last deployment. I explained the situation in the flattest terms I could manage. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, She told me plainly that every account where I was listed as the paying party could be closed or redirected at my discretion, that I owed my mother nothing beyond what basic decency required, and that basic decency did not include silently financing a household that had just told me I was unwanted in it. She said something else too. Something that stuck with me for days afterward, that the kindest thing I could do for everyone involved, including my mother, was to stop protecting her from a truth she needed to see. I want to be clear about something, because it would be easy to tell this part of the story wrong. This wasn't revenge. I didn't cancel those payments to punish her, and I didn't do it with any satisfaction. I did it because I finally understood that I'd spent years absorbing consequences that weren't mine to absorb, shielding people from the natural results of their own choices and calling that love. It wasn't love. It was exhaustion wearing love's clothing, and I was done wearing it. By 9 live that morning, I was back on base in uniform, moving through the familiar rhythm of formation and briefings, and the particular relief of being somewhere that operated on logic instead of feeling. I didn't check my phone during the day. I told myself I wasn't avoiding anything. I was simply present where I was needed, which had always been true of me, whatever Ryan liked to say at dinner tables. But some part of me knew that somewhere out there, invisible dominoes were already starting to fall, and that by the next morning, the silence I'd left behind in that house was not going to last. My phone started ringing at 6:14 the next morning, and I let the first 2 calls go, watching the screen light up against the dark of my quarters before I finally reached for it. By the time I checked, there were already 11 missed calls. Within the hour, there would be more than 30. The first one I answered was from a number I didn't recognize, a local Tennessee exchange, and a stranger's voice on the other end asked to speak with Linda Collins regarding an overdue account. I told them calmly that they had the wrong number and hung up before they could argue. That was when I understood this wasn't going to be a quiet morning. My mother called next. I pick up. Then Ryan, twice in a row. Then a number I recognized as our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Petrelli, which struck me as strange enough that I almost answered it, but I let that one go too. I made coffee. I got dressed. I told myself I would listen to whatever they had to say, once I was ready to hear it, not a second before, because I already knew that answering too early would mean absorbing someone else's panic before I'd had the chance to feel steady in my own decision. It was Emily's voicemail that finally cracked something open. Her voice was tight, controlled in the particular way people sound when they're trying very hard not to cry in front of whoever might hear them. She said the insurance company had called the house the night before, needed to speak with someone about a lapsed payment. She said the county had sent a notice about property taxes being past due, the kind of notice that comes with a deadline printed in red. She said Ryan's loan on the truck, a loan she hadn't fully understood the terms of until that morning, was somehow tied to a credit line that had just taken a hit. Her voice cracked once when she said, "Grace, I don't understand what's happening. Please call us back." I sat with that voicemail for a while before I called anyone back. Not out of cruelty, out of the simple, unglamorous fact that for 6 years, I had absorbed every one of these emergencies alone in silence, without a single person in that house, checking whether I had the bandwidth to keep doing it. And I needed a moment to feel what it was like for someone else to sit in that discomfort, instead of me. When I finally called Emily back, she answered on the first ring. She didn't waste time on hello. She told me my mother had spent the morning frantic, calling the insurance company and the tax office, and getting the same answer each time that the account had been redirected, that the authorized payer of record was no longer covering the balance, that whoever had been paying these bills had stopped. My mother, Emily said, hadn't even known there was a whoever. She genuinely believed Ryan handled all of it. That was the moment I understood how completely he'd let her believe a lie he'd never once corrected. Ryan got on the phone not long after, and his voice had none of the smugness from the dinner table. It was fast, defensive, already reaching for blame before I'd said a word. "What did you do?" he said, like I was the one who'd manufactured a crisis out of nothing. I told him evenly that I hadn't done anything except stop paying bills that had never been mine to pay in the first place. He laughed short and disbelieving, and said I was trying to punish Mom, that I was trying to blow up the family over one comment made in the heat of a bad night. I let that sit for a second before I answered. I asked him a simple question. How much of the insurance, the taxes, the loan repairs had he personally paid over the last 6 years? There was a pause on the line that told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth to answer. He didn't have a number. He didn't have anything. He tried to pivot, said something about how money isn't the only way to support a family, how presence mattered too, how he'd always been there for Mom in ways I never was, because I was always 3 states away in a uniform. I didn't argue that point. I let him have it, because arguing wasn't the thing that was going to settle this. The paperwork was going to settle this. I told him calmly that the bank statements would show exactly who had been transferring funds to which accounts for the past 6 years, that the insurance company kept a record of every authorized payer change, that the county tax office had my name on file, going back further than his truck had existed. I told him I wasn't interested in a shouting match over the phone, that if he wanted to keep insisting I was the villain in this story, he was welcome to. But the documents weren't going to agree with him. He hung up on me. I sat there for a moment afterward, phone in my hand, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel. Yet, not vindication exactly, and not guilt either, but a strange, clean kind of relief, the sensation of finally setting down something heavy I hadn't realized I'd been carrying with both arms for years. My mother didn't call again that day. I found out later that she'd spent the afternoon on the phone with the bank herself, asking questions she'd never had to ask before, hearing for the first time a version of the last 6 years that didn't match the story she'd been telling herself. I didn't know yet how deep that unraveling was going to go, but I could feel, even from 3 hours away, that something in that house had already started coming apart at the seams, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't going to be me holding the thread. Patricia Hall's office sat above a dry cleaner in downtown Clarksville, the kind of unglamorous space that told you she spent her money on being good at her job, rather than on decorating around it. I drove there 2 days after the phone calls started, not because I needed her permission to do anything, but because I wanted the truth laid out in black and white before I let myself feel any particular way about it. She'd already pulled together what I'd sent her: 6 years of bank statements, insurance records, the loan paperwork for the roof repair, and spread it across the table in neat chronological stacks. I sat across from her while she walked me through it, and even though I'd lived every one of those transactions, seeing them totaled up on paper hit differently than remembering them one at a time ever had. But it was the second folder that changed the shape of everything. Patricia had done some digging of her own at my request, and to do exactly how deep Ryan's financial entanglements with our mother actually went, what she found went further than either of us expected. There were 3 separate loans over the past 4 years that Ryan had taken out using our mother's name as either co-signer or guarantor, each one for amounts that didn't match what he'd told her they were for. The truck loan was the smallest of them. There was a personal loan he'd told her was for emergency dental work that had actually gone toward a down payment on a boat he'd sold within 8 months. There was a third larger one where he'd borrowed against the equity in her house itself, using paperwork she'd signed without fully reading to cover gambling debts he'd apparently been carrying since before he and Emily got married. Patricia had also pulled a handful of text messages and emails subpoenaed. Isn't the right word, since nothing was formal at that point, but Emily had voluntarily forwarded them once she started asking her own questions at home. In one thread from 18 months earlier, Ryan had written to a friend that he'd tell their mother. Grace has it covered if she ever asked about the house loan. Because Grace always has it covered. She won't even notice. Reading that sentence in his own handwriting did something to me that the dinner table comment somehow hadn't. That had been cruelty in the moment, said in anger, maybe even regretted somewhere underneath his pride. This was different. This was calculated. This was years of quietly counting on me to be the invisible safety net under his life without ever once considering what it cost me to be that. Emily called me that evening, her voice different than it had been. On the voicemail steadier, harder, the voice of someone who has stopped being surprised and started being angry. She told me she'd found the boat sale records herself, buried in an old email account Ryan didn't think she still had access to. She said she'd confronted him the night before, and he'd tried the same tactic he'd used on me. Deflection, blame, insisting I was the one trying to destroy the family, but she wasn't buying it anymore. I've been defending him to my own parents for years, she told me. I didn't know I was defending a liar. I didn't gloat. I want to be honest about that, because it would have been easy to feel something like triumph, watching Ryan's version of events collapse under its own weight, and I made a conscious choice not to let myself feel that. Emily was hurting. Whatever Ryan had done to me, he'd done something worse to her. He'd let her build a life on top of debts and deceptions she never agreed to. The final piece came from an unexpected direction. My Uncle Frank, my father's younger brother, called me directly, something he'd never done in all the years since Dad died. He told me he'd heard fragments of what was happening through Emily and wanted to hear it from me. I gave him the short version, the factual version, no embellishment. There was a long pause on the line, and then he said something I hadn't expected. He told me he'd always suspected I was the one keeping things afloat, that he'd noticed years ago how the numbers never quite added up when Linda talked about Ryan's generosity, but he hadn't wanted to cause trouble by saying so. He said he was done staying quiet. He told me he intended to say exactly that to my mother in person the next time he saw her. He kept that promise within the week. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Emily told me about it afterward, how Frank had sat my mother down at her own kitchen table and told her plainly that the family had spent years letting her believe a story that wasn't true, and that he, for one, wasn't going to keep doing it anymore. My mother, according to Emily, hadn't argued with him. She'd just gone very quiet, the way people do when a version of reality they've built their whole understanding around starts to give way beneath them. I didn't feel vindicated so much as tired, the particular tiredness that comes after holding your breath for longer than you realized. Ryan's excuses were running out of oxygen, one relative at a time, and there was no version of this left where he could keep insisting I was the problem. But knowing that didn't undo 6 years of silence, and it didn't erase the words my mother had said to me across that dinner table. Whatever came next was going to have to be built from the ground up, if it got built at all, and I still didn't know if my mother was capable of doing that kind of rebuilding. My mother spent 3 days going through every piece of paper in that house before she called me. And when Emily described it to me afterward, I could picture it exactly. Linda Collins at her kitchen table with her reading glasses pushed up on her nose, surrounded by a lifetime of manila envelopes and insurance statements. She'd never once thought to read closely because she'd never had a reason to doubt who was taking care of her. What she found, methodically folder by folder, was my signature, not Ryan's, mine on document after document going back years. The homeowner's insurance renewal from 4 years ago, the county tax receipt from the year the assessment jumped, and she'd worried aloud at dinner about how she'd manage it, the loan paperwork for the roof after the derecho. My name listed as the responsible party on line after line, where she'd always assumed without ever checking that her son's name would be. Emily told me later that my mother sat with those papers spread in front of her for over an hour, without moving the house silent, except for the refrigerator humming in the next room. It was in the middle of that search that she found the box. I'd almost forgotten about it in the chaos of everything that followed Mother's Day. The box I'd brought that night, the one she'd pushed aside without opening. She found it still wrapped, sitting, where she'd left it on the sideboard in the dining room, untouched for a week. Emily said she watched my mother's hands shake slightly as she peeled back the paper, like she already suspected what kind of thing was waiting inside might undo her. Inside was an old photo album I'd put together from pictures I'd been collecting for over a year. Pictures of her and my father from before I was born. Some I'd found in boxes in the garage. Some I'd had restored from damaged originals, arranged with small handwritten notes beneath each one. Beneath the album was a letter several pages that I'd written and rewritten more times than I want to admit, thanking her for things she probably didn't even remember doing. Teaching me to drive in the church parking lot on Sunday afternoons, sitting up with me the night before my first deployment. Even though neither of us said much, the specific way she used to hum while she cooked on ordinary evenings that had nothing to do with any holiday at all. And beneath the letter at the bottom of the box was a printed itinerary for a 10-day trip to the Amalfi Coast, booked and paid for. Departure date still 6 weeks out, with both our names on the reservation. I hadn't told her about the trip because I'd wanted it to be a surprise. Something to look forward to together after a hard year, a way of saying without saying it directly that I still wanted her in my life, even when she made that difficult. I found out afterward that she cried reading that letter in a way Emily said she'd never seen her cry before, not even at my father's funeral. Not the composed, dignified crying my mother usually allowed herself in front of other people, but something raw, something that came from realizing exactly what she'd pushed aside without a second glance on the same night. She'd told her own daughter she wished she'd never been born. She called Ryan that same evening, according to Emily, hoping perhaps for some kind of explanation that would make sense of what she was feeling, some context that would soften the shape of what she now understood. Ryan came over, and for a moment Emily thought maybe he was finally going to take responsibility for something. Instead, sitting in the same kitchen, where my mother had just spent hours confronting the full architecture of his deceit, the first thing out of his mouth was a question about whether she had any money left over from her savings account, because he had a few things still to sort out before the month was through. Emily told me she watched something in my mother's face close off entirely when he said that. Not anger exactly. She said it looked more like exhaustion, the specific exhaustion of finally seeing a pattern you've been refusing to see for years, all at once, with no way to unsee it again. My mother didn't yell at him. She didn't cry in front of him the way she had alone with that letter. She simply told him she didn't have anything left to give him right now, and that he should go home to his wife. I heard about all of this secondhand piece by piece over the following days, and I let myself feel it slowly rather than all at once. There was no satisfaction in it, not really. I hadn't wanted my mother broken open by grief and guilt. I'd wanted once, a long time ago, for her to simply see me. Now she was seeing everything all at once, and it was costing her more than I think either of us had expected. I didn't reach out first. I'd learned enough by then to know that whatever came next needed to come from her, needed to be something she chose, rather than something I orchestrated from 3 hours away. So I waited the way I'd learned to wait for orders in situations bigger than myself, trusting that clarity, once it arrives, tends to demand some kind of action from the person who finally has it. She showed up at the base on a Tuesday, and I almost didn't believe the message from the front gate when it came through Linda Collins, requesting to see Major Grace Collins. No appointment. I sat with that notification for a long moment before I told them to let her wait in the visitor center, because some part of me needed the extra few minutes to decide who I wanted to be when I walked in there. By the time I arrived, she'd been sitting in that sterile little waiting area for almost 2 hours. I could see it in the way she was sitting, spine too straight, hands folded too tightly in her lap, the posture of someone bracing for a door to open on something they're not sure they're ready for. She stood up when she saw me, and for a second neither of us said anything at all. She looked smaller than I remembered her, though I knew that wasn't really true. Grief and shame have a way of making people look like that. We sat across from each other at a plain table in the corner of the room away from the other families waiting there, and she started talking before I'd even fully settled into the chair. She told me she'd gone through every piece of paper in that house. She told me about the box, about the album, about the letter, though I already knew Emily had told me most of it. But I let her say it anyway, because I understood she needed to say it out loud to me, not just have it confirmed secondhand. She cried while she talked quietly without the performance I remembered from other hard conversations over the years. And she said the same thing more than once in different ways, that she'd trusted the wrong person. For reasons that had nothing to do with facts and everything to do with old, worn grooves in how she saw her children. She said Ryan had always been the one who needed protecting ever since he was small, and somewhere along the way that had calcified into a belief that he was also the one who was protecting her, and she'd never once stopped to check whether that belief was true. I let her finish. Then I told her as evenly as I could manage that the thing that hurt the most wasn't actually what she'd said to me on Mother's Day. It was tempting to let her believe that was the whole wound, because it would have been a simpler story, one bad night, one cruel sentence forgivable, in the way single mistakes usually are. But that wasn't the truth, and I owed her the truth more than I owed her comfort. I told her the real wound was older than that. Going back to childhood report cards that got a nod while Ryan's got a celebration, to years of watching her light up for him at tables where I sat quietly doing everything asked of me, and receiving, in return, the sense that I had to keep proving I deserved a place in my own family. The comment on Mother's Day hadn't come out nowhere, I told her. It had just finally said out loud what her actions had been telling me for 30 years. She didn't argue with that. I think if she had, I would have known nothing had actually changed. Instead, she just nodded slowly and said she didn't know how to undo 3 decades of that, but she wanted to try if I'd let her. I told her I forgave her. I meant it when I said it, and I still mean it now. Holding on to that particular kind of anger has never once made me stronger, and I wasn't interested in carrying it as some kind of trophy. But I also told her that forgiveness wasn't the same thing as going back to how things had been. And I needed her to understand the difference before we went any further. I wasn't going to quietly resume paying her insurance and her taxes and covering whatever gaps appeared in her finances while she directed her warmth toward whichever child was easiest to be warm toward in the moment. I told her that if she wanted a relationship with me going forward, it needed to be one where I wasn't valued primarily for what I provided, and where love didn't have to be earned through invoices. She said she understood. I don't know yet, even now, how fully she understood it in that moment. Some lessons take longer to settle into a person than a single conversation allows for. But I could see something shift in her face, while I spoke something that looked less like defensiveness and more like a woman, finally willing to sit with an uncomfortable truth instead of flinching away from it. Before she left, she asked about the trip. The Amalfi Coast still 6 weeks out. Both our names still on the reservation because I hadn't had the heart to cancel it, even in the angriest days after Mother's Day. I told her the offer still stood if she wanted it, but that it would be a different kind of trip than the one I'd originally imagined. Not a peace offering, not a reward for good behavior, just 2 people trying to figure out, honestly, whether they could build something better than what they'd had. She said yes. She said it quickly, like she was afraid I might take the offer back if she hesitated. And for the first time since Mother's Day, I felt something in my chest loosen just slightly, not healed, not yet, but no longer quite so tightly wounded either. Ryan sold the truck 6 weeks later. I heard about it from Emily in the clear's throat, same flat, matter-of-fact tone she'd started using for most updates about him. By then, no anger left in it. Just the tired precision of someone reporting facts about a person she was already halfway out the door from. He'd needed the money to cover what remained of the boat loan and part of the debt against Mom's house equity. And even after selling it, Emily said he was still short, still scrambling, still calling relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, with stories that didn't quite hold together anymore because the one person who used to quietly make his shortfalls disappear had stopped doing that. Emily filed for separation not long after. She told me it wasn't really about the money in the end, even though the money was what had cracked the door open. It was about discovering, piece by piece, how much of her marriage had been built on things she wasn't allowed to know. Debs hidden from her, lies told to her own family on his behalf. A version of himself he'd curated for her that had almost nothing to do with who he actually was, when nobody was checking his math. She said she was staying in the area, keeping the modest condo they'd bought together before the truck, before the boat, before any of it. She sounded steadier than I'd heard her sound in months. The particular steadiness of someone who has stopped waiting for an explanation that was never going to satisfy her anyway. My mother sold the house that summer. I want to be honest and say that surprised me. I'd expected her to hold on to it out of stubbornness, if nothing else. The way people sometimes cling to a house long after it stops making financial sense, simply because letting it go feels like losing the last physical evidence of a life they used to have. But she didn't cling to it. She told me, when she called to tell me about the listing, that keeping a house sized for a family of 4, when it was just her rattling around in it alone, had started to feel less like comfort and more like a monument to a version of her life that wasn't coming back. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment closer to town, smaller, easier to manage on her own income. And she told me with something that sounded almost like pride, which I hadn't expected from her, that she'd started keeping her own budget for the first time in years, tracking every expense herself instead of assuming someone else would catch what she missed. I didn't offer to help her furnish it. That wasn't coldness. It was, I think, both of us learning a new shape for our relationship, one where I wasn't automatically the answer to every gap in her life. She asked a neighbor to help her move the heavier furniture. She asked Emily, of all people, to help her pick out curtains, and the two of them had apparently become close in a way neither of them expected, bonded by having survived the same man's dishonesty from different angles. My mother started going to a part-time job at a fabric store 2 towns over, something she hadn't done since before she married my father. And she told me over the phone one evening, almost shyly, that she liked having somewhere to be that had nothing to do with any of her children at all. A year passed, the way years do, when you're not looking directly at them slowly, in the day-to-day, and impossibly fast in the aggregate. I got promoted that spring. Orders came through for a new assignment, overseas, a real one, the kind that would mean months away and required a kind of readiness I'd been building toward for most of my career. The Amalfi Coast trip happened before any of that in the fall, 10 days that were quieter and more honest than any time I could remember spending with my mother. We didn't talk much about Ryan while we're there. We talked instead about my father, about small things neither of us had ever bothered to say out loud before, about what she wanted the rest of her life to look like, now that she was finally the one deciding. The day before I shipped out, she came to see me off. No speeches this time, no performance for whoever might be watching, none of the old need to be seen a certain way in front of family. Just her standing near my car, in the gray early light, looking at me the way I'd wanted her to look at me, for as long as I could remember. She didn't say much. She just told me plainly that she was proud to call me her daughter, and something about the simplicity of it landed harder than any elaborate apology could have. I hugged her. It was a different kind of hug than the ones I remembered from childhood. The ones I used to give, hoping they'd be enough to earn something back. This one didn't need to earn anything. It was just 2 people finally standing on something closer to equal ground, choosing each other honestly, instead of out of habit or obligation or old unspoken debt. I think about that Mother's Day. Sometimes the version of me who drove away from that house without looking back, and I don't regret a single mile of that drive. Because I've learned something in the years since that I wish I'd understood decades earlier. Love that only runs in one direction isn't really love at all. It's just quiet exhaustion wearing a familiar face. And sometimes the most caring thing you can do for a relationship is refuse to keep carrying it alone. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where it found you. Drop a comment and let me know what part stayed with you the longest. We have so many more stories like this one waiting to be told, so make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's keep this journey going together. You are nothing but a pathetic charity case. We are terminating you effective immediately, and security will escort you out right now. My sister-in-law's shrill voice echoed across the crowded marble lobby of my family's corporate headquarters, making dozens of employees stop and stare. It was 8:45 in the morning on my very first day, as a low-level data entry clerk. She sneered at my clothes, reveling in her power trip, completely unaware that I was not there to collect a paycheck. I calmly unclipped my temporary visitor badge, handed it to her, and smiled. I told her to tell my father that the emergency board meeting in exactly 5 hours was going to be absolutely unforgettable. She had no idea that the anonymous billionaire savior arriving at 2:00 to bail out their bankrupt company was actually me, and I had already bought 80% of their voting shares. My name is Naomi, and I am 33 years old. Before I share exactly how I dismantled my toxic family's empire piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the pain while an arrogant family member tried to tear you down. The morning sun was streaming through the massive glass walls of Apex Solutions, casting long shadows across the imported Italian marble floors. Apex was a mid-sized logistics firm that my father Harrison had built into his personal monument. The lobby was bustling with employees rushing to catch the elevators, clutching their coffees and preparing for the workday. I had barely stepped through the revolving doors when Lexi intercepted me. Lexi was my brother Cameron's wife, a woman who wore her unearned title of Human Resources Director like a weapon. She was dressed in an overly branded designer outfit that screamed of new money and deep insecurity. Her eyes narrowed with a predatory gleam the moment she spotted me. She did not even wait for me to reach the security desk. She marched right into the center of the atrium, blocking my path. "Stop right there, Naomi," she commanded, raising her voice so that the nearest groups of employees would hear. People immediately began to slow their pace, glancing over their shoulders with thinly veiled curiosity. "Lexi," I said evenly, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. "Good morning to you too. I am just heading up to the 4th floor to get my desk assignment." "You are not going anywhere except back out those doors," she announced, crossing her arms over her chest. "I just got off the phone with Harrison. We have decided that bringing you on board is way too much of a liability for Apex. Your father only offered you this data entry job because your mother begged him to take pity on you. But frankly, we cannot afford to carry dead weight, not even family." I stood perfectly still, letting her cruel words hang in the air. The murmurs around the lobby grew louder. I knew exactly what she was doing. This was a public execution designed to put the family disappointment back in her place. For years, they had spun a narrative that I was an utter failure because I had refused to follow my father's rigid, misogynistic corporate path. I had moved away, lived quietly, and built my own venture capital firm from the ground up. Because I never flaunted my wealth or begged for their approval, they naturally assumed I was destitute. Lexi took a step closer, looking me up and down with exaggerated disgust. "I mean, look at you," she scoffed, gesturing toward my outfit. I was wearing a bespoke, unbranded charcoal suit that cost more than her entire wardrobe, but she lacked the refinement to recognize quiet luxury. "You show up on your first day, looking like you bought your clothes at a thrift store. Did you really think you could just waltz into a professional corporate environment after squandering your life on those stupid startup fantasies? Cameron warned me you would be a disaster, but I did not think you would embarrass us before 9. "I assure you, Lexi, I am dressed perfectly for the business I am conducting today," I replied, my voice calm and completely devoid of the panic she was so desperately trying to provoke. Her face flushed with hot irritation at my lack of tears. She had fully expected me to crumble to beg for the minimum wage job, to ask her to call my father and plead on my behalf. When I did none of those things, her voice grew louder and significantly harsher. "Do not talk back to me in my lobby," she snapped. "Cameron has been working 18-hour days to keep this company afloat. He is a brilliant chief operating officer, and he does not have time to hold his little sister's hand while she pretends to be a working professional. You threw your life away, Naomi. You refused to listen to Harrison. You wasted whatever money you had. And now you expect us to clean up your mess. Well, the charity stops today. We are terminating you effective immediately. Security will escort you out." She snapped her fingers toward 2 large security guards standing near the reception desk. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, but dutifully began walking toward us. The humiliation was supposed to break me right there on the polished marble floor. My family had always used public shame to enforce obedience, a toxic tactic spearheaded by my father and perfected by his golden child, Cameron. But I was not the scared 20-year-old girl they remembered. I felt no urge to defend myself, or explain that my so-called stupid startup fantasies had evolved into a massive private equity firm. I felt no need to tell her that Cameron was not a brilliant executive, but a corrupt thief who had embezzled millions to fund his sports cars and luxury vacations, driving Apex Solutions into catastrophic debt. They were drowning, and they thought kicking me off the boat would somehow save them. I reached up and calmly unclipped the temporary paper visitor badge from my lapel. I held it out to her. Lexi snatched it from my hand, a victorious smirk plastered across her face. "Smart girl," she sneered. "Now turn around and walk out before I have them physically throw you out." I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression entirely unreadable. "I want to do this right, Lexi," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but laced with a cold, terrifying authority. "Tell your father-in-law that the board meeting in exactly 5 hours should be highly interesting. I highly recommend you and Cameron attend. It will be the most important meeting of your entire lives." Lexi scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "You are completely delusional. That board meeting is for executive leadership and our new investors. It has nothing to do with a fired data entry clerk." "Just deliver the message," I said smoothly. I turned on my heel and walked toward the revolving doors. I did not look back. I did not rush. I walked with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who owned the very ground they were stepping on. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, I bypassed the crowded bus stop that my family assumed I would be using. Instead, I walked straight to the curb where a sleek armored black Maybach was waiting idly. The uniformed driver immediately stepped out, opening the rear door for me with a respectful nod. I slid into the plush leather interior, the heavy door shutting solidly behind me, instantly silencing the noise of the city street. I reached into my designer handbag, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I knew by heart. My lead corporate attorney answered on the first ring. "Mitchell," I said, leaning back against the luxurious headrest. "Lexi just played her part perfectly in the lobby. I am officially terminated from Apex Solutions." "Excellent," Mitchell replied, his voice practically humming with predatory legal efficiency. "I assume we are a go for Phase 2. "We are an absolute go," I instructed coldly. "Begin the assets freeze on Apex Solutions immediately. Lock down their corporate accounts and notify the bank that the majority shareholder is invoking the debt covenants. I do not want to leave Harrison or Cameron a single cent to maneuver with before 2-0. Consider it done, Naomi. They will not even be able to buy a cup of coffee with company funds by noon." I ended the call and looked out the tinted window. As the Maybach glided away from the building, my family thought they had just disposed of their biggest embarrassment. They had absolutely no clue they had just finalized their own absolute destruction. My phone began to vibrate against the leather seat, a relentless, angry buzzing that signaled the beginning of the digital assault. I glanced down at the screen. The notifications were flooding in from the family group chat, ironically titled Apex Legacy. My father Harrison was the first to strike. His message was a wall of capitalized letters and fury. "Naomi, what on earth is wrong with you? Lexi just called me practically in tears. You caused a massive scene in the main atrium and forced her to call corporate security on your very first day. You are an absolute disgrace to this family. We try to throw you a lifeline and you publicly humiliate us." Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of Lexi claiming to be in tears, a second message popped up. This one was from my mother, Catherine. "I literally begged your father to give you this data entry job, Naomi. We opened our doors to you. We gave you a chance to finally do some honest work after your ridiculous entrepreneurial failures. And this is how you repay our generosity. Why cannot you just be compliant and grateful for once in your life? Look at your brother. Cameron has been working himself to the bone for this company. He carries the weight of the entire family on his shoulders. And you cannot even manage to walk through the front door without throwing a childish tantrum. I read the words with cold clinical detachment. Years ago, texts like these would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety and self-doubt. I would have drafted a dozen apologies, desperately trying to explain my side of the story, begging them to understand that Lexi had ambushed me. But the gaslighting was so incredibly textbook now that it bordered on boring. It was the same script they had been reading from since I was a teenager. I stared at Catherine's praise for Cameron, remembering exactly how my brother had earned his reputation as the family genius. When I was 22, I had spent 6 months researching and drafting a comprehensive digital expansion strategy for Apex Solutions. I had proudly brought the binder to Harrison's home office, outlining how the company could cut costs by 30%. Harrison had chuckled, patted me on the shoulder, and told me to leave the heavy lifting to the men. He suggested I focus on finding a suitable husband instead. 2 months later, Cameron presented that exact same binder at a Sunday family dinner. He had simply swapped my name for his on the title page. Harrison had treated Cameron to an extravagant steak dinner, praising his visionary mind, and promoted him to vice president of strategy. The very next day, Catherine had purchased Cameron a $30,000 watch to celebrate his brilliance. When I tried to speak up when I cried and pointed out that it was my work, Catherine had pulled me into the kitchen and pinched my arm hard. She told me I was being hysterical and bitter. She hissed that a good sister supports her brother's success instead of trying to steal his spotlight. They had convinced everyone that I was a jealous, unstable failure. They repeated the lie so often that they actually believed it themselves. I locked my phone screen, letting it go dark. I would not reply. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to defend myself so they could twist my words and play the victims. I was going to give them nothing but absolute silence. A few minutes later, my phone lit up again. This time it was an incoming call, not a text. The name on the screen made me sit up slightly straighter. It was Elijah, was my sister Brittany's husband. He was a brilliant, hard-working African-American man with a master's degree in supply chain logistics. He was also the only person in the entire extended family who possessed an ounce of integrity. Naturally, my family treated him appallingly. Harrison constantly undermined Elijah's operational plans at Apex, intentionally passing over his data-driven strategies to implement Cameron's disastrous, expensive ideas. Catherine frequently made passive-aggressive comments about Elijah's background, treating him as an outsider who should be grateful they allowed him to marry Brittany. I answered the call. "Hello, Elijah. Naomi, are you okay?" His voice was hushed and urgent, echoing slightly, as if you were hiding in one of the concrete stairwells. I just saw the whole thing go down in the lobby. I saw Lexi confront you. I know you did not cause a scene. I was watching from the mezzanine balcony. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. Elijah had always been observant. He was the only person who consistently remembered my birthday. He was the only one who would casually bring me a plate of food at family barbecues. When Catherine deliberately forgot to set a place for me at the main table. "I am perfectly fine, Elijah," I said, my voice steady and warm. "I appreciate you checking on me. I really do." Lexi is parading around the Human Resources Department acting like she just survived a hostage situation. Elijah continued, his voice dropping even lower. "But that is not why I am calling. Something really bad is happening up on the executive floor. Cameron has been shredding documents and physically destroying hard drives in his office all morning. He looks like a cornered animal. Harrison is sweating bullets about this too. 00 board meeting with the new investors. I think the company is going under, Naomi. I think they brought you in to pin something on you. They cannot pin anything on me if I do not work there." I replied smoothly. "And Elijah, you are right. The company is in critical condition. Cameron has been cooking the books for years, and Harrison has been signing off on it." I knew it. Elijah breathed a mixture of validation and dread in his tone. "I warned Harrison about the missing capital expenditure 6 months ago, and he threatened to fire me. Listen to me very carefully, Elijah." I said, my tone shifting to absolute authority. "I want you to go back to your office right now. Do not wait for your lunch break. Do not draw attention to yourself. I want you to quietly pack up all of your personal belongings, your photos, your degrees, your coffee mug. Put everything in your car, and then leave the building. Take the rest of the day off." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Elijah was smart enough to recognize a genuine warning when he heard one. "Naomi, what exactly is going to happen at 2?" he asked quietly. "Justice," I answered. "Just pack your things, Elijah. You are the only decent person in that building, and I do not want you caught in the crossfire when the walls come crashing down." I ended the call with Elijah and let my phone drop into my lap. The heavy silence of the armored vehicle wrapped around me. Once again, the smooth hum of the engine, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I knew was currently unfolding inside the Apex Solutions headquarters. As my driver navigated the crowded city streets, I pulled a secured tablet from my leather briefcase and opened the master financial file. The irony of the entire situation was almost physically palpable. Just 3 weeks ago, my father had summoned me to a formal family dinner. He had put on a pathetic display of parental magnanimity, telling me that despite my ongoing failures to launch a successful career, the family was willing to throw me a lifeline. He had offered me a data entry position that paid barely above minimum wage. He framed it as a profound charity case, a generous favor from a loving father to a deeply misguided daughter. The reality staring back at me from the glowing screen of my tablet was vastly different. Apex Solutions was bleeding cash at an unprecedented catastrophic rate. Cameron had driven their operating margins into the ground with disastrous logistical contracts and massive ego-driven marketing campaigns that yielded zero return on investment. The company was drowning in defaulted loans, desperately fighting off aggressive creditors daily. Harrison thought he was playing a brilliant game of corporate chess. He firmly believed that today, at exactly 2 in the afternoon, a mysterious billionaire savior from a massive private equity conglomerate was arriving to bail them out. He had spent the last month practically groveling to my firm's representatives through third-party, ego-driven marketing campaigns that yielded zero return on investment. The company was drowning in defaulted loans, desperately fighting off aggressive creditors daily. Harrison thought he was playing a brilliant game of corporate chess. He firmly believed that today, at exactly 2 in the afternoon, a mysterious billionaire savior from a massive private equity conglomerate was arriving to bail them out. He had spent the last month practically groveling to my firm's representatives through third-party intermediaries, promising them the moon and the stars if they would just inject enough capital to save his crumbling legacy. He had absolutely no idea that the conglomerate buying out his defaulting debt was entirely owned by me. I had spent the last 12 months quietly acquiring every single piece of toxic debt Apex Solutions had generated. My firm had purchased their outstanding loans for pennies on the dollar through various shell companies and subsidiary funds. Today was not a friendly bailout. It was a hostile, merciless debt-to-equity swap. By 2 exactly, my firm would legally convert that mountain of debt into a controlling 80% stake in Apex Solutions. The family thought they were keeping their empire. In reality, they had already lost it, and I was simply arriving to hand them their eviction notices. The Maybach glided to a smooth halt in front of a soaring ultramodern high-rise in the city's most exclusive district. The doorman, recognizing the vehicle, immediately stepped forward to open the heavy glass door, greeting me with a deeply respectful nod. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private elevator directly to the top floor. The doors slid open silently, revealing my hidden sanctuary. It was a sprawling $12 million penthouse with panoramic views of the skyline, custom imported furniture, and museum-quality ultramodern high-rise in the city's most exclusive district. The doorman, recognizing the vehicle, immediately stepped forward to open the heavy glass door, greeting me with a deeply respectful nod. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private elevator directly to the top floor. The door slid open silently, revealing my hidden sanctuary. It was a sprawling $12 million penthouse with panoramic views of the skyline, custom imported furniture, and museum-quality art. It was a pristine world completely separate from the toxic grip of my family. Nobody in the Apex Circle knew this place existed. Not my parents, not Cameron, not Lexi. The only person who had access to this sanctuary was Todd, my boyfriend of 2 years. I had always believed Todd was my safe harbor. When I returned home exhausted from ruthlessly building my firm, he was the one pouring the wine and listening to my frustrations. I walked across the plush carpet, the thick material absorbing the sound of my footsteps completely. I expected to find Todd in the kitchen, making his morning coffee, but the room was empty. A low voice drifted down the hallway from my private study. I approached quietly, assuming he was on a work call, but as I drew closer, the specific cadence of his voice and the name he spoke made my blood run instantly cold. Todd was sitting in my leather desk chair, his back to the open door, speaking animatedly into his phone. "Yes, Cameron, I am telling you, you have absolutely nothing to worry about," Todd was saying, a sickeningly ingratiating tone dripping from his voice. "Naomi is completely oblivious. She left for the office early this morning, thinking she was actually going to be doing data entry. She genuinely believes your father is trying to help her out. I have been telling her all week how lucky she is to finally have a stable job." He paused, listening to my brother on the other end of the line. I know. Todd chuckled, a cruel, mocking sound that sent a shockwave of absolute disgust through my chest. "She is delusional. She keeps rambling about her little startup investments, but I have kept her totally distracted just like we agreed. She is manageable. Now, regarding that vice president of business development position we discussed. You promised me the title and the 6-figure salary would be finalized before the end of the quarter. I am doing my part, Cameron. I am keeping the family embarrassment out of your hair." I stood frozen in this doorway, staring at the back of the man I thought I loved. The betrayal was so absolute, so meticulously calculated that it temporarily stole the breath from my lungs. Todd was not my safe harbor. He was a spy, a paid informant planted in my life by my own brother. He was leaking my daily schedule, my private conversations, and my emotional state directly to the family that despised me, all to secure a prestigious job title at a company that was secretly bankrupt. He had sold my trust to advance his own pathetic career. I took a single step into the study. The sound of my designer heel, clicking against the hardwood floor, was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Todd whipped around, his eyes widening in sheer, absolute panic as he realized I was standing in the doorway. I stepped back into the sprawling marble hallway of my penthouse, leaving Todd to stew in his own terror for a moment. I glanced at the glowing screen. The name flashing was Elijah. Elijah was my brother-in-law, married to my superficial status-obsessed sister Brittany. More importantly, Elijah was an exceptionally brilliant African-American man, holding a master's degree in supply chain logistics from a top-tier university. He was the operations manager at Apex Solutions, a title that grossly underestimated his actual intellectual capacity and his daily contributions to the firm. My family, completely blinded by their own deep-seated prejudices and blatant nepotism, constantly undermined him. Harrison and Cameron treated him as a glorified assistant, intentionally dismissing his data-driven strategies simply because he did not fit their narrow, bigoted view of what a corporate leader should look like. They marginalized him at every family dinner, and they ignored his operational warnings in every board meeting. Brittany was no better, treating her husband as a mere accessory rather than an equal partner. Despite being the smartest man in any room, he walked into Elijah was suffocated by my family's toxic culture. Yet, he was the only person connected to the Apex bloodline who had ever treated me with genuine, unadulterated respect. I pressed the answer button and brought the phone to my ear, keeping my eyes locked on the study door where Todd was trapped. "Hello, Elijah," I said, my voice completely stripped of the rage that was currently burning through my veins regarding Todd's betrayal. "Naomi, are you okay?" Elijah asked immediately. His voice was hushed, carrying a slight echo that suggested he was speaking from a secure location, likely one of the concrete stairwells at the Apex headquarters. The genuine concern in his tone was a sharp contrast to the deceit I had just uncovered in my own home. "I saw the entire thing go down in the lobby this morning. I was walking across the mezzanine balcony when Lexi cornered you." "I am perfectly fine, Elijah," I replied smoothly, leaning against the cool wall of the hallway. It was exactly the kind of theatrical performance I expected from her. It was a complete setup, Elijah continued, his voice tight, with suppressed frustration. Lexi had security position near the elevators before you even walked through the front revolving doors. She orchestrated the entire public shaming to make a point. I wanted to come down there and intervene, Naomi. I really did. But Harrison has been breathing down my neck all week, threatening to terminate my department's funding if I step out of line. I would never want you to risk your position to defend me, I assured him, feeling a surge of profound appreciation for the lone supporter I had in that wretched building. Lex's little power trip is the least of my concerns today. That is actually why I'm calling you privately. Elijah said, his tone shifting from personal concern to sharp, urgent professionalism. Lex's stunt in the lobby is just a distraction. Something massive and incredibly dangerous is happening on the executive floor right now. I have been running independent audits on the supply chain accounts for the past 3 months because the vendor invoices were not matching our delivery manifests. I listened intently, allowing the silence to encourage him to continue. Cameron has been cooking the books, Naomi. Elijah revealed the heavy weight of the secret evident in his hushed whisper. He has been funneling millions of dollars through phantom logistics vendors. We are paying for massive freight shipments that simply do not exist. The money is being routed to offshore holding accounts. When I tried to bring the discrepancy to Harrison's attention last week, he completely shut me down and told me I was overstepping my bounds. But this morning, Cameron is in full panic mode. He is physically shredding documents in his suite. He is destroying hard drives. They are desperately trying to hide the financial bleeding before the Tule board meeting with the new investors. A cold, satisfied smile touched my lips. Elijah was sharp enough to catch the massive fraud that Harrison was desperately trying to bury. My brother-in-law was a phenomenal asset, entirely wasted on a family of corrupt fools who were too arrogant to utilize his talents. You are incredibly thorough, Elijah, I said, validating his brilliant investigative work. Your operational audits are flawlessly accurate. Cameron has indeed been embezzling corporate funds to support his luxury lifestyle, and Harrison has been fraudulently signing off on the quarterly reports to protect his golden child. They have effectively bankrupted Apex Solutions. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. You know about the phantom accounts, Naomi. If the new investors discover this during the buyout meeting this afternoon, Harrison and Cameron are going to face federal indictment. The entire company is going to implode today. Elijah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I instructed, my voice dropping to a register of absolute commanding authority. I value your integrity, and I value your mind. You are the only person in that building who actually understands how the company operates. Because of that, I am giving you a direct warning. A warning? He repeated, confusion mingling with realization. I want you to leave that stairwell, walk directly to your office and pack up your personal belongings, I told him clearly. Take your framed degrees, your photographs, and anything else you care about. Put them in your car and leave the Apex premises before 2. Do not tell Brittany. Do not warn Harrison. Just quietly remove yourself from the blast radius. The silence that followed was thick with dawning comprehension. Elijah was a brilliant man. He did not need me to spell out the exact details to understand that a catastrophic shift in power was imminent. He realized in that profound moment that the sister-in-law everyone dismissed as a failure was holding the detonator to the entire corporate empire. Understood, Elijah said quietly, asking no further questions. I am packing my things right now. Take care of yourself, Naomi. You too, Elijah, I replied. I will be in touch very soon. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my tailored pocket. The confirmation of Cameron's frantic document shredding was the perfect validation of my impending strike. The Apex Empire was already burning from the inside out. I turned my attention back to the study door, my expression hardening into a mask of pure ice. Elijah was safe. Now it was time to deal with the traitor standing in my home. I stepped back into the doorway, locking eyes with Todd, ready to systematically dismantle the man who thought he could sell me out to my own family. Todd's hand shook violently, as he scrambled to press the end call button on his smartphone. The device slipped from his sweaty fingers, clattering loudly onto the polished mahogany desk. For a man who had just spent the last 10 minutes confidently negotiating his corporate future with my brother, he currently looked like a terrified child caught stealing from a cash register. His chest heaved as he tried to drag air into his lungs, his eyes darting frantically around my private study, as if searching for a hidden exit. There was none. He was trapped in the very sanctuary he had chosen to defile. This penthouse was supposed to be my absolute refuge. I had purchased this sprawling property entirely in cash, placing it under a blind trust to ensure my family could never trace my residence. It was a fortress designed to keep their relentless toxicity at bay. When I invited Todd to move in with me 6 months ago, I believed I was opening my safe haven to a partner who respected my boundaries. I had given him the access codes, the security clearances, and my complete trust. I had allowed him to share the one space in the world where I did not have to wear armor. Instead, I had willingly invited a parasite into my home. As I stood there watching his pathetic display of panic, the pieces of the past few months rapidly locked into place with blinding clarity. The sudden, uncharacteristic phone calls from Catherine, demanding to know where I was on specific weekends. Harrison somehow knowing exactly which coffee shop I frequented on Tuesday mornings, Cameron making snide, highly specific remarks about my supposed financial struggles during our rare family encounters. They had not been guessing. They had not been lucky. They had a direct informant sleeping in my bed. Todd swallowed hard, forcing a sickeningly artificial smile onto his face. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, taking a cautious step toward me. "Naomi, sweetheart," he stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher than normal. "It is not what you think. I know how that sounded, but you have to understand." Cameron called me out of nowhere. He was just asking questions about how you were adjusting to the new data entry job. I was just humoring him to keep the peace. "You know how your family gets when they feel ignored." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply crossed my arms and stared at him with absolute freezing contempt. "Humoring him," I repeated softly. The words hung in the silence of the study, heavy and dangerous. "You were humoring my brother by explicitly telling him that I was completely oblivious. You were humoring him by promising to keep me manageable and distracted. You were humoring him by demanding a 6F-figure vice president title at Apex Solutions in exchange for your continued espionage services." Todd physically recoiled as I recited his exact phrases back to him. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He realized instantly that I had not just caught the end of his conversation. I had heard the entire transaction. I had heard him negotiate the price of my privacy. "They are your family, Naomi," Todd blurted out, shifting his strategy from denial to desperate justification. His tone took on that familiar condescending edge he always used when he thought I was being too emotional. "They were genuinely worried about you. Harrison reached out to me months ago. He said you were living in a fantasy world, pretending to be some big-shot investor, while secretly going broke. He told me you needed an intervention before you ruined your life completely. I was only trying to protect you." The absolute audacity of his gaslighting was staggering. He was actually trying to convince me that selling my daily schedule to my abusive father and corrupt brother was an act of profound romantic protection. He honestly believed he was the rational savior, managing a delusional woman. "You thought you were protecting me by brokering a backroom deal for a corporate title." I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You decided that my boundaries were irrelevant. You took the security of this home, the trust I placed in you, and you monetized it. You sold my emotional state to Cameron so he could feel superior while his own company burned to the ground. I did it for us." Todd snapped his fear, morphing into defensive anger. "You refuse to communicate with them. You isolate yourself in this massive apartment, hiding from the real world. Harrison offered me a genuine opportunity at Apex Solutions. He offered me a chance to build a real future for us, because you clearly cannot handle your own family. I stepped up to be the man in this relationship. I secured a vice president position, so we would not have to worry about money. when your little startup ventures finally fail. The knife twist of his betrayal was not just the act of spying itself. It was the sheer breathtaking arrogance behind it. Todd truly believed I was weak. He believed the narrative my family had spun. He looked around my $12 million penthouse, drank my imported wine, slept in my custom bed, and somehow convinced himself that I was a financial failure who desperately needed his mediocre corporate intervention. I was willing to sacrifice my sanity and my safety just to secure a shiny new title on his resume. "You secured nothing," I told him, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "You are not a corporate strategist. You are a cheap informant who just negotiated a job at a company that is currently defaulting on every major loan it possesses. You sold your loyalty to a sinking ship, Todd. And you sold out the only person who actually provided you with a life of luxury." Todd scoffed, crossing his arms, trying to regain some semblance of masculine authority. "You are just being hysterical, because your pride is hurt. Apex Solutions is a massive logistics firm. Harrison told me about the billionaire investor coming in today to expand their operations. They are about to double their market share. You have absolutely no idea how business works, Naomi. You are just angry because they offered me a seat at the executive table while you are stuck doing data entry." I looked at the man I had trusted, marveling at his absolute ignorance. He was standing in the center of my empire, entirely blind to the power I held. He had chosen to align himself with my abusers, betting his entire future on their fabricated wealth. He had handed them the knife and pointed it directly at my back. I did not feel heartbreak. I did not feel the urge to cry over a lost relationship. I felt an overwhelming icy clarity. The betrayal was complete. My family had poisoned my sanctuary, and Todd had been their willing accomplice. It was time to show him exactly whose table he had just begged to sit at. I did not raise my voice or step closer. I simply held his gaze with a cold, terrifying calm that made his bravado completely disintegrate. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, until the sheer weight of it forced him to speak again. "You are acting completely unhinged right now, Naomi," Todd scoffed, running a nervous hand through his hair. He shifted his weight, trying to physically dominate the space by puffing out his chest. "This is exactly what Harrison was warning me about. You get paranoid and push people away the second they try to intervene. You are completely out of touch with reality." I remained perfectly still. I let him dig his own grave, watching him deploy the exact same manipulative tactics my mother had used for decades. It was fascinating in a clinical sort of way to see how easily my family had infected his mind with their toxic narrative. "Look at yourself," he continued, emboldened by my silence. "You cannot even manage your own basic finances without going into the red. You have been playing businesswoman for years, chasing these ridiculous startup dreams, and you have absolutely nothing to show for it. Someone had to step up. I am securing our future because you clearly cannot do it yourself." I took another step toward me, adopting a tone of faux sympathy that made my skin crawl. "I am doing the hard work here. I am managing your family's expectations. I am dealing with Cameron and Harrison, so you do not have to. They gave you a job today because they know you are financially incompetent. If I had not brokered this deal, if I had not kept them informed about your erratic behavior, you would be stuck doing data entry for the rest of your life. You should be thanking me, thanking you." I repeated, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You genuinely believe you are the master strategist here. You think you are securing our future by acting as a paid informant for a man who embezzles from his own company. Stop being so incredibly dramatic." Todd snapped, his frustration boiling over. "You do not understand basic corporate dynamics. Harrison is a titan in this city. Apex Solutions is about to receive a massive influx of capital from a major private equity firm. They are bringing in a billionaire investor this afternoon. I secured a spot on the winning team. I am making sure we have a safety net when your little business ventures completely fail. You are just too stubborn and proud to admit that you need my help to survive in the real world." His words were a perfect, sickening echo of my father's arrogance. Todd had swallowed their lies completely. He genuinely thought I was a fragile, incompetent woman who needed a man to secure her financial stability. He thought my absolute silence was a sign of submission. He had no idea it was the calm before the execution. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my secured tablet. I did not waste my breath arguing against his pathetic delusions. I simply tapped the screen a few times, accessing the encrypted files I used to manage my personal real estate portfolio. I walked over to the mahogany desk, stood right next to him, and placed the glowing tablet directly in his line of sight. "Read the highlighted document," I commanded my voice, slicing through the thick tension in the room. Todd scoffed, rolling his eyes as if I were forcing him to look at a child's finger painting. But as his gaze dropped to the high-resolution screen, his arrogant smirk instantly froze. He blinked, leaning in closer, his eyes scanning the dense legal text of the property deed. He read the purchase price first, $12 million paid entirely in cash. Then his eyes darted to the top of the document, where the name of the sole exclusive owner was printed in bold, undeniable letters, my name. The tablet slipped from his fingers and hit the desk with a sharp clack. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The absolute magnitude of his miscalculation was finally crashing down on him. He had spent months living in a $12 million fortress, drinking my imported wine and sleeping in my custom bed, all while convincing himself he was the primary provider for a failing artist. "You own this entire penthouse," Todd whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "I own many things, Todd," I replied smoothly, crossing my arms and looking down at him with absolute disdain. "What fascinates me most is not that you chose to betray me. It is how incredibly cheap you were when you sold your loyalty. You traded your integrity for a vice president title at Apex Solutions, a company that has not turned a profit in 4 years. You allied yourself with Harrison and Cameron, 2 men who have embezzled their own legacy into the ground. They are currently drowning in over $60 million of defaulted loans." Todd shook his head frantically, backing away from the desk. "No," Harrison said, "they have an investor. He said a billionaire is coming today to finalize a massive capital injection." "And did you honestly think a corporate titan would rely on a data entry clerk's insecure boyfriend for strategic espionage?" I asked, dissecting his foolishness piece by piece. "Harrison fed you a fantasy to keep you compliant. You thought you were stepping up to be the man of the house, saving the hysterical woman from financial ruin. In reality, you were nothing but a cheap pawn, easily manipulated by a failing CEO who needed someone naive enough to believe his lies. You sold out the only person who actually provided you with a life of absolute luxury, and you did it for a temporary desk on a rapidly sinking ship." I did not wait for his pathetic response. I reached under the lip of the mahogany desk and pressed my thumb against a concealed biometric sensor. A subtle chime echoed through the room, followed immediately by a steady red light blinking on the security panel mounted near the door. The private security team for this building was comprised entirely of former military personnel. They were highly compensated specifically for their speed, their absolute discretion, and their unquestioning loyalty to the building's owners. Todd stared at the blinking red light, his chest heaving as the reality of his situation continued to crash down around him. He took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Naomi, please," he begged, his voice trembling so violently it cracked. "We can talk about this. I was stupid. I was completely manipulated by your father. Harrison made it sound like you were in desperate trouble, and I just wanted to help you. I love you." I looked at my Patrick Phipe watch, noting the precise position of the second hand. "You have exactly 3 minutes," I said, my voice cutting through his desperate pleas. "You may take one single bag from the master bedroom closet. You will only pack the items you brought with you when you moved in 6 months ago. Any clothing, watches, or accessories purchased with my money will remain here. If you attempt to take anything that belongs to me, my security team will detain you for grand larceny. 3 minutes." Todd choked out his eyes wide with disbelief. "Naomi, be reasonable. All my things are here. My entire life is here." 2 minutes and 45 seconds, I replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. "If you are not standing at the front door with your single bag when the security team arrives, you will leave with nothing but the clothes currently on your back. Anything left behind will be incinerated by the evening staff. The sheer terror finally overrode his shock. Todd spun around and sprinted down the hallway toward the master suite, his dress shoes slipping frantically against the polished marble floor. I listened to the chaotic sounds of his panic echoing from down the hall, drawers being ripped open, hangers clattering to the hardwood floor, zippers tearing in a desperate rush. He was frantically trying to salvage whatever miserable remnants of his life he could fit into a single duffel bag. I remained standing in the study, utterly motionless. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the man tearing his life apart in the next room. Todd had made a calculated decision to align himself with my abusers. He had weighed my value against a promised corporate title and decided I was expendable. He had simply bet on the wrong horse, and now he was paying the absolute price for his profound stupidity. Exactly 2 minutes and 50 seconds later, the heavy oak double doors of my penthouse swung open. 2 towering security operatives stepped into the entryway. Their dark suits immaculately tailored, their expressions completely neutral. They moved with silent practice efficiency, flanking the doorway and waiting for my command. Todd stumbled out of the master suite hallway, gasping for breath, clutching a cheap canvas gym bag to his chest. His designer tie was skewed, his hair disheveled, sweat pouring down his face. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the 2 massive guards blocking the exit. He looked past them to me, his eyes brimming with genuine, unadulterated fear. "Naomi," he pleaded one last time, his voice dropping to a pathetic whine. He dropped to his knees right there on the expensive rug, his hands clasped together. "Do not do this. I have nowhere to go. I quit my consulting job because Harrison promised me the vice president role today. I do not have an apartment. I do not have a car. Please, just give me another chance. I will do anything." I walked slowly out of the study and stood a few feet away from where he was kneeling. I looked down at him, observing the miserable, groveling creature he truly was. "Harrison is going to be fired for financial fraud at Two Cliff today," I stated coldly. "Apex Solutions will cease to exist in its current form by sunset. You traded your career for a phantom position at a bankrupt company. Escort him out," I commanded, shifting my gaze to the security operatives. "If he ever attempts to enter this building again, or if he attempts to contact me through any channel, you are authorized to use whatever force necessary to remove the threat." The guards moved instantly. They grabbed Todd by his upper arms, hauling him to his feet with effortless strength. He thrashed weakly against their grip, but it was entirely useless. They dragged him backward toward the open doors. "You cannot do this to me," Todd screamed, his voice echoing shrilly in the corridor as they pulled him over the threshold. "I was trying to save you. You are making a massive mistake." I did not answer. I simply pressed the automated panel on the wall, and the heavy oak doors swung shut, cutting off his pathetic shouting with a solid, definitive thud. The electronic locks engaged with a heavy click. I was finally completely alone. The vast, luxurious penthouse was enveloped in absolute silence. I walked over to the floor, to ceiling windows in the living room, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The morning sunlight caught the glass of the distant corporate towers, gleaming brightly against the blue sky. I stood there and allowed the reality of the morning to fully wash over me. Within the span of a few hours, I had been publicly humiliated and fired by my arrogant sister-in-law. I had been digitally attacked and gaslighted by my own parents. I had discovered that the man sleeping in my bed was a paid informant selling my privacy for a job title. The double betrayal from both my blood relatives and my romantic partner should have shattered me. It should have sent me spiraling into the exact kind of hysterical breakdown my family always claimed I was prone to having. Instead, the betrayal acted as a forge. The intense heat of their treachery burned away any lingering traces of guilt or familial loyalty I might have secretly harbored. It solidified my resolve into unbreakable steel. They had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they viewed me as nothing more than a convenient victim to be used, abused, and discarded whenever it suited their selfish needs. They lacked even a basic shred of human decency. I checked my watch. The hands moved steadily forward, ticking closer to the appointed hour. It was time to leave this personal mess behind and step fully into the role of the apex predator. I needed to head to the secure virtual war room to finalize the legal executions with Mitchell and my forensic auditing team. The two-night board meeting was no longer just a corporate acquisition. It was going to be a total unmerciful massacre. I would not spare a single one of them. I turned away from the floor-to-ceiling windows and walked down the expansive hallway toward my master suite. The time for reflection was over. I needed to prepare for war. I stepped into my massive custom-built walk-in closet, the soft-motion sensor lights illuminating rows of designer garments. I reached up and unbuttoned the cheap, unremarkable blouse my mother had insisted I wear for my new data entry position. She had actually mailed it to me last week, with a passive-aggressive note, suggesting I try to look presentable for once. I let the fabric drop to the floor and kicked it aside. I would never wear a costume of submission for that family again. Instead, I pulled out a razor-sharp, bespoke midnight blue suit, crafted by my personal tailor in Milan. The fabric was immaculate, the cut severe and completely unapologetic. It was the armor of a woman who commanded boardrooms, not one who cowered in lobbies. I slipped into a crisp white silk shirt and fastened the tailored blazer. Feeling the immediate shift in my posture, I moved to the glass display case in the center of the room and unlocked it. Reaching for my favorite timepiece, I strapped the heavy diamond, encrusted Patek Philippe watch around my wrist. The cool metal against my skin was a grounding physical reminder of the empire I had built entirely on my own. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The vulnerable, eager-to-please daughter was completely dead. The ruthless chief executive officer was ready to take the wheel. I left the master suite and walked into my secure home office, locking the heavy soundproof door behind me. I sat down at my expansive glass desk and tapped the control panel, lowering the motorized blackout shades over the windows to ensure absolute privacy. I booted up the encrypted multi-monitor communication station and logged into the secure virtual war room my firm utilized for hostile takeovers. The screens flared to life instantly. On the primary monitor, my lead corporate attorney, Mitchell, sat at a massive conference table in our downtown headquarters. He looked impeccably sharp, surrounded by thick stacks of legal binders. On the adjacent screens, my elite team of forensic auditors were already logged in their faces, serious and focused. "Good morning, Naomi," Mitchell said, his voice crisp and strictly business. The asset freeze on Apex Solutions was executed flawlessly. Their banking accounts are completely locked, their corporate credit lines are severed, and their payroll systems are officially frozen. They are entirely paralyzed. As of 10:15 this morning, Harrison cannot even authorize the purchase of printer paper. "Excellent work, Mitchell," I replied, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the cool glass of my desk. "Now, show me the final audit reports. I want to see exactly how deep my brother managed to bury this company before he started shredding his hard drives." The lead forensic auditor, a brilliant numbers expert named David, shared his screen to the central monitor. A complex web of financial ledgers, highlighted bank transfers, and offshore routing numbers materialized in front of me. "It is significantly worse than we initially projected, Naomi," David stated, bringing up a heavily redacted internal balance sheet. "Your brother-in-law, Elijah, was completely correct about the phantom logistics vendors. But Cameron was not just padding invoices. He created an entire network of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He authorized massive monthly payouts from the Apex operating budget to these fake companies, claiming they were essential international freight partners. We tracked the routing numbers directly to private accounts solely controlled by Cameron." I stared at the staggering numbers glaring back at me from the screen. "How much did he steal?" David gave me the exact figure. Over the past 4 years, Cameron has successfully embezzled just over $14 million from Apex Solutions. David confirmed his tone, reflecting his professional disgust, and we have the receipts for exactly where that money went. He used corporate funds to purchase 2 custom Lamborghinis, fully paid in cash. He leased a massive luxury yacht for a 6-week vacation in the Maldives last summer. He even used company money to purchase a $3 million vacation home in Aspen under his wife's maiden name. Lexi has been living like royalty on stolen corporate capital. My jaw tightened. Lexi had stood in the lobby just hours ago, wearing designer clothes, but with stolen money, and called me a charity case. She had mocked my supposed failures, while her husband systematically robbed his own family blind. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. "What about Harrison?" I asked, shifting my gaze back to Mitchell. "My father micromanages every single cent that moves through that building. There is absolutely no way Cameron could siphon $14 million out of the operating budget without the chief executive officer noticing the massive hole in the quarterly reports." Mitchell smiled, a cold, predatory expression that meant he had found the kill shot. He held up a thick manila folder to the camera. "Harrison noticed," Mitchell confirmed. "He noticed 2 years ago, but instead of reporting his son to the authorities or removing him from the company, Harrison chose to cover it up to protect his golden child. We recovered the deleted tax returns your father filed with the federal government. Harrison personally signed off on massively inflated operational losses. He intentionally committed federal tax fraud to hide Cameron's embezzlement from the banks and the board of directors. He legally certified fraudulent documents to keep his precious son out of federal prison." The final pieces of the puzzle locked into place. Harrison had jeopardized the entire family legacy, broken federal laws, and driven a profitable company into complete bankruptcy just to protect Cameron. Yet, when I simply wanted to pursue a career in finance, Harrison told me I was not smart enough to handle real money. He had protected a thief and exiled a visionary. "This is the final nail in the coffin," Mitchell stated, tapping the folder on the table. "They committed wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and federal tax evasion. The paper trail is completely undeniable. If we hand this over to the authorities, Harrison and Cameron will face a minimum of 10 years in federal prison. We are not handing it over to the authorities just yet," I said, a dangerous calm settling over my mind. "We are going to use this to execute them in the boardroom. I want them to look at the undeniable proof of their own pathetic corruption. I want them to realize that the daughter they banished is the only reason they are not currently in handcuffs." I looked at the screens, seeing the readiness in my team's faces. The financial skeletons had been fully unearthed, and the graves were dug. My family thought they were walking into a celebration today. They were actually walking directly to their own funeral. "Prepare the termination documents," I ordered Mitchell. "We leave for the Apex building in 1 hour." Mitchell nodded, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he brought up the finalized capitalization table on my center monitor. The pie chart that appeared was a thing of absolute terrifying beauty. For decades, Harrison had ruthlessly guarded his 60% controlling interest in Apex Solutions, keeping Catherine and my older sister Brittany pacified with minor non-voting dividend shares. Cameron had been gifted a 20% voting stake the day he turned 25. I, of course, had been given absolutely nothing. Now the screen displayed a completely different reality. A massive solid wedge of deep navy blue consumed the vast majority of the chart, leaving only a microscopic sliver of gray for my family.